it's time for us to get started. Should we wait for another minute or so, or want to go ahead and get going?
Let's go.
Let's go. Okay. Welcome everyone. Glad to see everyone tonight. I'm going to start by reading our mission statement, which I always love to do, actually. WIVLA's mission is to provide an inspiring forum for women to explore and advance their creative development, to promote their work in the marketplace, and to infuse the community with their spirit of cooperation and invention. I don't think we have any new members tonight. If you are, just give us a little wave so we can introduce you. Mary. Okay, Mary.
Can you all hear
Mary.
me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I was having some problems. Yeah, I'm a new member. I recently came across WIVLA when I signed up to take the Soul Collage course, that workshop that just passed, and I really enjoyed that. So yeah, I'm happy to join you today. Like I said in that course, at this moment in my life, I think I'm an enthusiastic consumer of art. I haven't produced much of my own. I would say that I tend toward literary arts, but that's been a part of my life that's been on hold for a long time. And but I really enjoyed the soul collage class. I thought it was really, and you know, we did a lot in a short period of time. It was really inspiring, and I'm happy to be with you all and hopefully hear the speaker this evening.
All right. Well, it's great to have you with us and have you as a member now.
Thank you.
Yes. Welcome.
Thanks so much. I have a lot going on in the background, so I might have to have my screen off for most of this, but
What's your last name, Mary? I just see it says Mary's iPhone.
oh, sorry. My last name is Gleason, G-L, yeah.
Like Jackie Gleason back in the day? Okay, thank you.
Hey.
Suppose I should raise my hand.
Yes, there's Fran.
Yes, please do.
Well, I'm sort of a renewing member rather than a new member, but I'm really glad to be joining all of you. So, yeah. Oh, and I direct Real Poetry, which is happening for 10 days on starting the 31st of March online. And it's a poetry film festival. And I think it's on your calendars. I hope you will join us. If you have any questions about it, feel free to ask me. And there's also an in-person part, which is on the 12th of April and is a Texas showcase, so featuring all Texas artists.
I'm sure that we have some poets who'd be very interested in going to that. Yeah. Sounds great. How many people usually attend? Is it a big event?
Well, this year is kind of different because we've really expanded the online version. And so we get a really good number online. Actually, Margot can tell you quite a bit about it because she has been to everyone and has some of her films in it. So, Margot, do you want to say a few words about what it's like and
Yeah,
whatever?
yeah, it's really fascinating because there are wonderful videos from around the world. I'm always happy and very grateful when I have work in it. But there's the discussions, the cafes that you can attend online, and you just hearing people how they create their work is just really fascinating. And I had gotten a ticket to go to I love the in-person events too, but I'm having shoulder replacement tentatively on April the 7th. So I might have a ticket to give away. Damn it. So anyway, but I highly recommend it. You'll learn a lot, and they play the juried selections. They played them twice, so you can either watch during the day. But if you're, too busy during the day, you can watch them at night. And I think are they available for like a week when you buy a ticket or a festival
They're
pass?
actually available for 6 weeks.
Okay, great.
So they're
Great.
streaming on demand for 6 weeks. The only thing about that 6 weeks is that it does not have a real cafe attached to it, which is where the audience and the curators and the filmmakers and the poets all get a chance to talk on a Zoom.
But it's amazing some of the stories that people can tell in just a short,
Oh,
short
and
amount of
all of the
time.
films are short, by the way. They're 6
Yeah.
minutes or under. So, and there are a lot of them, so they come in little bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So get you some coffee and some snacks and close
Glass
the
of
door and tell
wine.
people, tell your family to leave you alone, that you're feeding your soul. So there you go.
Okay.
I like it.
Okay, well, we
Thank
have a
you.
very exciting happening coming up next month. You want to talk about it for us, Melody?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes. Sorry, I was trying to get a phone number for someone. So
Oh, okay.
that's okay. I can sort of half multitask. So April is Eco Fund Month. This is the time when 2 members of WIVLA who have been members in good standing for 2 years will receive a $1,000 grant. And so one goes to a visual member and one goes to a literary member, and they can use that money in any way that furthers their artistic endeavors. People have been very creative in how they've used this money. You have to maintain your membership through at least the following April, when you are required to give a report on how you spent the money.
Mhm.
We're not real fussy about how you spent it, but we would like to know how you spent it. And I always look forward to these presentations. They're so enlightening and inspiring. And I am pleased to say that so far, 17 people have signed up.
Wow, that's
I know.
great.
Like, Susan asked me how many people have signed up, and a lot of times it's like, this time it's like 4, maybe
Yeah.
sometimes fewer. But I just looked and it's like, holy cats, I thought I was in the wrong place. So
Oh, that's great.
yeah,
I think that's the most we've had in
I
a couple of
know.
years. Yeah,
I know, yeah.
exciting.
So yeah, so be a little competitive this time. And the 2 who will be presenting how they spent their little windfall will be Mildred and who's the other one? Who's the art one?
Mildred
I know
and
this, but alas, I don't.
Isn't it Jean?
Yeah, is it Jean?
Oh, Jean King. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So yes, I'm looking forward to see what y'all have to say. Anyway, there is still time if you are interested and you qualify. Like I said, member in good standing for 2 years, 2 consecutive years. You can go onto our website under, I believe it's the Why WIVLA page, and there's a link on that page that talks about the Eco Fund, and you can sign up there. And it's, and now I'm trying to remember, it is the, what is it, Educational and Cultural Opportunity is what the ECO stands for.
Mm-hmm.
So several of us on this call have been the happy recipients of that. I know Susan,
Oh, yeah.
I have, Kay has, Margot has, Lane has,
Yeah.
Ellen?
Ellen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm thrilled that there's 17 people who have been members for at least 2 years now and qualify. So
That's great. I'm
Yeah.
excited about that.
yeah. So even if you are not eligible for this year, I encourage you to attend the meeting. next month to get an idea of how our members are utilizing this grant. It's very inspiring. Yes, Miss McStay.
I want to say that the April meeting is one of my all-time favorite meetings. I get so inspired. I love seeing everybody's project and hearing about them. And I just think it's one of the greatest things we do. So I'm looking
I
forward
agree.
to it.
What'd she say?
I agree wholeheartedly.
Mhm.
Let's see, Rebecca, you have a couple of announcements for us?
Yeah, so our upcoming literary events, we have Poetry by the Bay on April 12th at the LaPorte Library. The sign up is live on the calendar. Then the Journey into Hope short story contest with Houston Writers Guild is open until the end of April. That's also on the calendar. Make sure you're logged into the website to get the discount code. The fee is less for members, and you can submit up to 3 stories, 5,000 word maximum. And then I was asked to share the March 29th edible book contest, which is not strictly our event, I believe. But you can check the newsletter for the details of that one. And then just a heads up to everybody that next November's member meeting reading theme will be resilience. And I think
Okay. Let's see, Melody was going to talk about the felting workshop, but it's full, so. That's good news. Let's see what we got here coming up. Shirley, let's talk about Rise.
All rise.
All
Rise.
rise.
The visual people, members of WEVLA are invited to submit artworks to the juried art show called Rise. The theme is Rise. Anything that means, whatever that means to you in a visual form. You have until June the 15th to submit up to 5 pieces for $35 as a member, and you have to log on to the membership website. And if you want to go beyond the 5 pieces, you can go all the way up to 10 submissions. Anything over 5 costs $4 each as members. Now, this is open to anyone who identifies as a woman, whether they're members of WIVLA or not, who would like to submit. So we have spread the word as much as we can. We're going to keep spreading the word so people will begin submitting their pieces of art for this juried show. Then the juror is Fran Elliser. She's a very qualified artist herself, so it should be a good show. It'll open up on, let's see, the submissions close June the 15th. You'll be notified in early July whether any of your works were accepted or not. And I believe it opens on the 17th of July in Sabine Street Studios, and will hang until August 31st. So yours truly has not yet submitted because she's trying to figure out when to paint, but I will get some pieces put together, and I hope you will as well. Any questions?
Can you say something about the theme, Rise?
Whatever that means to you. It could be, mountains rising, bubbles rising. It could be a rising star. It could be a rising sun. It could be anything a creative mind sees that might imply rise.
Okay. Great. Denise, let's hear from you about our newsletter.
Oh,
She's on the phone.
she's on the phone.
She's
it
on the
looks like.
phone. She's on the
Yeah.
phone to us, I think.
Okay.
Well,
think she-
while we're waiting for her, I just want to say she rocks that newsletter.
I'm telling you,
And
doesn't
I
she
don't
though?
know who is doing the email. I don't know if Denise is doing the emails. But I love I love the email that comes out that says get your stuff in, because
Oh.
I forgot to send stuff in, and I complained about it all last year. I said, why don't people send me stuff? And then I was like, oh my God, I forgot all about it. So now I understand.
And it takes a while to read the newsletter. It's so
It
filled.
does.
Well,
There's so much.
I love the way she has sort of the table of contents at the beginning, and
Yeah.
you can find what you want to read first and click on that. And I thought, why didn't I think of that? But anyway, she's got it covered.
She does. She's doing a great job. I hope you heard all that, Denise. We were shouting your praises.
So are you, no, you're not able to get on?
Well,
Um,
while we're waiting for Denise, I can also, and I swore I wasn't going to say a word during this meeting. I was going to behave myself. But I just have to reiterate the Journey into Hope anthology contest. That is very, very exciting. One thing we get to write, and that's always exciting, but also both the winners and the honorable mentions get their works published in an anthology, which you get copies of and can buy one for all of your family members and everybody on your Christmas list. And there is a book launch that will happen in October. Which is great fun because everybody reads a little bit of their work and you get to congratulate everybody. So, and you want to invite your friends and neighbors to come hear you read your work. Um, so and you get to attend the Author Palooza conference that takes place right after the book launch. So it's a very exciting event, and I hope everybody is at least thinking about hope. I'm thinking about hope, and I'm having a little trouble with it. So I hope maybe next time I can attend a meeting and keep my mouth shut. But sorry, Rebecca, I told you we were going to have the lead on that, and I couldn't help myself.
well, I'm happy to get some more information about it, Ellen, so that's great. Maybe Denise can put down in the chat, Denise, could you put the date for call for content? When you need your content in for the newsletter for everyone. I know you send out that email, that wonderful email, but
Always the 20th,
Yeah, it's
except
the
in
20th
February.
is the deadline.
always the 20th. Okay.
Yep.
All right. I think we're going to move on unless Denise, you want to try? Okay. We're going to move on to our presentation now. Rebecca, would you please introduce our presenter?
Yes, I am so pleased to do that. So I would like to welcome Elizabeth Farfán-Santos, a Chicana author and owner of Dreamers Books and Culture, a new independent bookstore in Houston specializing in Latine and Latin American literature. She is a creative writer at heart, the author of Undocumented Motherhood, Conversations on Love, Trauma, and Border Crossing, a hybrid ethnography, memoir, and testimonio. Her work spans academic articles, books, poetry, and essays, all of which challenge us to feel and think more deeply about the complexities of life and identity. She is here to discuss her work to expand understanding and awareness of Latine diversity in the United States through her writing and now through the creation of a Latine bookstore in Houston. And I'm about to post the links, all of those links in the chat.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I hope I'm not muted. Okay, there we go. It's such an honor to be here and to be able to speak about kind of the body of some of my work. I thought that I would start by maybe reading a little bit from my book, from the introduction of my book, and then using that to talk a little bit more about and just kind of give an example of the work that I do. I pride myself on really leading by example and doing the work as a way of inspiring the work. As Rebecca said, and thank you for that beautiful introduction, my most recent book is called Undocumented Motherhood. It was published at the end of 2022, and it is still so very relevant, but I'm going to read a section from the introduction. After several weeks waiting in 2 different host homes in the Rio Grande Valley, Claudia's coyote informed her that it was time for her daughter to leave. Nati would be traveling to Houston, Texas, without her mother, in a car with other children and a woman she had never met. Nos dijeron que siempre estaríamos juntas, Claudia cried, y no fue así, no fue así. In 2013, Claudia Garcia and her then 2-year-old daughter, Natalia, Nati, left their small town in a region near San Luis Potosí, Mexico, to join Claudia's husband in Houston. Claudia had made the decision to cross the border because Nati was born with a hearing impairment, and she hoped that in the United States her daughter would have a chance at a better life. I met Claudia at the Southeast Community Health Center in 2015. We met a couple of times at the clinic in the beginning before Claudia welcomed me into her home. I remember thinking her energy was captivating. She felt young and lighthearted, light-spirited. Claudia was in her 30s, so she was in fact young, but it was more than that. Talking with her was easy from the very beginning, like we had known each other for years already. She opened up to me in a way that others didn't. She wanted me to know all of the layers of her experience. And many of those layers were wounds that were still very raw. My grandmother would have called Claudia ligera. Claudia felt light, but I wouldn't think much about it until after I had heard her story and seen her wounds. Through our conversations together, Claudia and I discovered that our children went to the same school. Later, they even came to share the same classroom. It wasn't a huge coincidence since the clinic where we met was in the same neighborhood as the school, and both had been part of that community for generations. When I met them, Claudia and her husband had 2 daughters, Nati, who was born in Mexico and takes center stage in the book, and Jackie, who was born in the United States. Most of our conversations took place in Claudia's living room. We'd drive over to her home after dropping our kids off at school, and there we would sit on her couch, remembering. While Jackie napped in the other room, the early morning light still dim in the house, Claudia's most enduring memories unfolded for me over a series of episodes that, like the scenes of a captivating novela, sent me on a daily roller coaster of emotions, awe and disbelief. Growing up, I simultaneously loved and disliked Mexican novelas. The drama and extreme suffering that Mexican women endure in novelas was often too much for my 13-year-old heart to bear. I longed for the main character to catch a break that never seemed to come soon enough, at least not until she had first been put through every trial and disaster imaginable. Every episode would ebb and flow as though resolution was just around the corner, almost there, but always just out of reach. My grandmother would laugh at my desperation and say, La emoción es el propósito, hija, el drama. The emotion is the point, she emphasized. Emoción means to be saturated with feeling, passion, drama. There's purpose in emotion, in the feelings that come up in the present moment. There's suffering and struggle in the drama, but there's also passion and joy. Claudia's life story came alive for me in this way, like episodes of a novela, momentary snapshots, ongoing, still in flux. As I wrote her narrative, I was forced to give up my desire for resolution and sit with the memories and the feelings as they came up, some Claudia's and some mine. When Claudia told me about sending Nati off with the coyote, I felt unable to find the right words. I told her I couldn't imagine how painful and frightening that must have been for her. In reality, it was more complicated than that. I couldn't help thinking of my own children. As a mother, I could imagine the terror I might feel if I had to hand my children over to strangers, not knowing where they would go, if they would be safe, or if I would ever see them again. As a mother, I felt Claudia's tears in the pit of my stomach. Un desespero that, although for me only imagined, felt thick and suffocating in its absoluteness. Sitting there with my head down, listening to her cry, I thought, my children, I could never, would never. As a US citizen, however, I had no idea what that had really felt like for Claudia. Born with the privilege of papers, I couldn't possibly know what it meant to be an undocumented mother, faced with few choices, none ideal. Hand my children over to a coyote in profound hope that they would make it and have a future, or what? I thought about my own mother, who had to send my brother and me to live in Mexico with my grandmother when we were just months old. My parents were working hard to make ends meet, but it wasn't enough. My father had just naturalized after being undocumented, and he couldn't find work. He and my mom were both teenagers. They were struggling just to buy food, and they felt they had no choice but to send us away. For Claudia, there was no alternative either. She wouldn't return to Mexico. It was not an option for her or her daughter. Unless you have a lot of money, people like her don't make it very far over there, she said solemnly, reflecting on the additional barriers for people with disabilities in rural Mexico. Putting her daughter in the care of people she didn't know while crossing the border meant coming to terms with the reality of what would be her new life as an undocumented mother. Claudia would soon discover, however, that undocumented wouldn't only mean without citizenship. It would also stand as a permanent marker of all the challenges she would have to make alone. Undocumented would also be the physical and emotional pain that lived inside of her, and the everyday moments of joy and hope she created out of thin air, securing only small rests for herself when possible. I have been carrying Claudia's story and how it relates to my story and my mother's story for far too long, afraid to write it for fear of getting it wrong, yet driven by the need to release it. I have felt responsible for Claudia's story, for representing it in a way that is true to the story's spirit, to its humanity and grandeur, at least as I felt it. Throughout the story's unfolding, I often found myself wandering into my own maternal history, to my mother's and grandmother's experiences. There were many instances where Claudia's stories took me back home, back to the womb. As I tell Claudia's story, mostly translated into English and forged out of the remembered episodes of her life that she chose to share with me, I weave in conversations with my own mother and grandmother. My mother's stories came up in the process of understanding Claudia's. It was impossible for me not to think back to their experiences, ones I lived and stored away in my memory, but never had the courage to ask about, and others I had heard only as stories of warning. My mother's story is not the same as Claudia's. However, their narratives are connected to a type of motherhood molded by migration, the US-Mexico border, and a quest for a better future. The geopolitical border creates and shapes Mexican families on both sides. It has done so for generations. Even the very sacred notion of motherhood, what motherhood means and how it's embodied and lived by Mexican women, carries the open, throbbing, and fertile wound of the border. This book, then, is a tapestry, a weaving together of testimonios and an intimate witnessing of motherhood between Claudia and me. Claudia's story features a type of motherhood that often goes unnoticed, is misunderstood, and is itself undocumented. A maternal experience of love, sacrifice, and child advocacy that isn't in the parenting literature, but that is nonetheless the reality of millions of immigrant women in the United States. While every mother has a different story, stories that recount the struggles of forming one's maternal identity through migration and displacement rarely get the attention they deserve. Societies demand everything of mothers, especially selfless sacrifice. Mothers are expected to put their children and families above everything else, their work, their personal lives, and even their own health. Mothers are supposed to sacrifice their own future for their children's future. But even sacrifice is political and fundamentally shaped by race, class, and political status. Immigrant mothers, especially those who migrate without formal papers, are judged very differently for their sacrifices. Fleeing across the US-Mexico border to protect their children's lives and future is not often dignified as a selfless act of maternal love, but rather charged as a selfish and criminal act, a crime punishable by state-sanctioned family separation and detention. The result is that immigrant mothers often feel compounding guilt and torment over the sacrifices they had to make during their migration. This guilt and pain, buried in their bodies, bleeds through their testimonios and sits on the silent, unspoken, unseen, and thus undocumented parts of their medical histories. Living in the United States as an undocumented Mexican immigrant is to live with extreme uncertainty. Claudia's story, although recounted as memories, was saturated by the everyday struggle of the present moment, but also stubbornly focused on the future. In imagining and visualizing a future for her family in the US, Claudia was so focused on this vision that she felt as though if she turned away and lost focus, even for a second, even to take care of her own health, everything might fall apart forever. The moment Claudia handed her baby over to a coyote was one of the most painful of her life. It took everything out of her, the air out of her gut, the prayer from her soul. That moment, however, also spawned the rest of Nati's life in the US and the rest of Claudia's life as an undocumented mother. Claudia sobbed through this part of her story, seemingly unable to put into words what it felt like to send her child off without her. I didn't have the courage to ask her to explain, but my mother helped me understand. As a mother, you never forget the minute you hand your baby over to someone else. Not sure when you'll see them again, my mother said softly. That kind of trauma, said the pega, it sticks to you. Sorry, that was a bit long. This is the introduction to Undocumented Motherhood. And this is the culmination of what for me was almost a decade of research on undocumented immigrant access to healthcare in Houston. And the work that I did in this book in particular, it was really important for me that the book be much more than just about the politics of immigration status. There's so much discourse around that, and there's so many narratives that are solely focused on political status. And one of the things that I've tried to do as a writer is always kind of counter these stereotypes and narratives, particularly about Latino. And in my case, a lot of my research centers around, a lot of my more recent research centers around Mexican Americans, Mexican immigrants. That's the identity that I identify with. And it's a group of people that I've been really interested in just kind of understanding as I understand myself and my own integration in society since I was very young. And so the work is really speaking back to this narrative that, in my opinion, is incredibly dehumanizing and reductive, in that it really turns human beings into just political objects, right? And because all we're hearing in the media is the narratives of their undocumentedness or their illegalness or their alienness, their otherness, then everything else about their humanity, about our humanity, is erased. Being mothers, being sisters, brothers, other forms of members of society. And even when there are positive narratives about immigrants, they tend to focus on the labor production of the immigrant. And so how much immigrants contribute in terms of our physical labor, right? And so there are these, which I think is, with so many negative scripts, I think that people well-meaningly, supporters of immigrant communities well-meaningly try to find ways to counter these narratives, particularly the ones that speak to immigrants stealing resources or occupying resources that don't belong to them. And so discussing, bringing up narratives of, sorry, of the immigrants' contribution then becomes really, really important to countering those scripts. And so, the book then focuses on a completely different side, right? And tries to say, well, not only are immigrants good for labor, but that's not the reason that people deserve, to be treated humanely or with compassion. Focusing on mothers and on women is also particularly important because women's labor is a type of labor that is often not recognized, not valued within kind of capitalist discourses as well. And so the book then ends up being more about the types of connections that we share as members of this community, as mothers in particular, than necessarily just the undocumented identity. And, it's been a couple of years out, and I'm happy to say that this is the impact that it's having. And so the book has really been well received among people of all walks of life. And a lot of young women as well, and young men reflecting on their mothers and reading the book and immediately wanting to call their mother, which I think is great. When we're in a kind of, I think, a historical moment where young people are revisiting wounds and traumas, and family members are getting cut off. I think that, the book is really saying, hey, have you ever asked your mother, what her experience was, and what was your mother? And the reason the book does this is because I'm doing this as I'm writing. And so I'm interviewing Claudia. And one of my interventions as a researcher is to not make myself this objective gaze from the outside that's just writing Claudia's story. So weaving in my mother's story, weaving in my grandmother's story, inserts my own self and inserts my own vulnerabilities into the book. So both of us are being vulnerable. I'm asking Claudia to be vulnerable as she's sharing her story, but I'm also being vulnerable in sharing my story. My mother is being vulnerable. My mother does not like to have any kind of emotional conversations at all. She's very shy. And so asking her certain questions was very difficult for her. Interviewing her was very difficult. And all of these vulnerabilities are in display in what I see as a tapestry, as I call it, but also shared vulnerability in our kind of dialogue and in our conversation, which is what dialogue is, right? Sometimes dialogue among researchers erases that vulnerability because the researcher, and especially the anthropologist or any kind of social scientist, is really trying to be that objective observer. And I really erase that. I erase any idea of the objective observer by inserting myself into the narrative. And so that I do that very intentionally, because as I said, the main objective of the book is really to reach across, some of these ideological borders that we create as a society, or fears of unknowns that we create between each other, to really see all of the different ways in which we can connect. And it's not meant to erase our differences, but it is meant to highlight our connections through compassion and shared vulnerability. And so this is something that, I describe myself as a writer who, primarily forces us to feel something. I work with emotions a lot, but I also do this by inserting kind of my own vulnerability in this role, right? To kind of, in my opinion, model that work for the reader. So readers are able to take the book and have a similar experience because I'm modeling it for them. I'm not just kind of telling them what to do or theoretically, proposing an argument. As a writer, it's taken me a lot of years to get to the place where I can feel confident and free in this type of voice. It hasn't been easy, being trained in academia, kind of getting my writing and training through academia. And as an anthropologist, where you really are trained to write in a specific way for a specific purpose, but always kind of fighting those boundaries to insert and to have my own voice. This voice of mine and everything that I've just said isn't just unique to me. It is, in fact, these are in fact modalities of writing that we see throughout Latine literature, and that we've inherited from Latin American writers. And so when I talk about testimonios, for example, that is a typical form of Latin American writing that emphasizes that experience, that testimonial, right, of bearing witness, right, of being embodied and in body in a narrative and being inserted. And I think what that means and why it's called a testimonio is that it implicates you as the listener, right? And so when I read a section, and in the section I say, I've been carrying this story, I've felt responsible for this story, right? So it's more than just hearing the story, being a listener, bearing witness to a testimony, and then being responsible for what I do with that testimony. And so that is a very different type of storytelling, but it is a storytelling that has its roots in Latin American writing, in a lot of the different forms in which Latino writers in the United States, but also folks in Latin America, have documented so many types of experiences that they've had, whether it's going through some form of political uprising or being a woman in a particularly violent society and having to find ways of documenting that. As women in Latin America, it's been hard to get our words on paper. I think this has been historically kind of a universal part of the female writing experience, right? Is not being allowed to write in particular historical moments, being silenced or in danger, right? And so what are other ways that women have shared stories? And in Latin America and, you know, in Latina writing, we look all the way back to our indigenous ancestors in ways of sharing stories that were communal, that were around a kitchen table or a campfire between granddaughters and grandparents and mothers, particularly for women, right? I talk in the book about comadres. Comadres are, the best way I think to translate it in English is co-mothers. And so in Latin America, we have a tradition of having co-mothers, and these are very, very deep female relationships that we have where we're basically mothering each other as adult women. We take care of each other, and it's a friendship that is much deeper than just a friend. To the point where a co-mother or a comadre might even, you know, be the one who takes care of your children if you're ever unable to, right? Or if you're not there in that sense. So how we tell stories, how I tell my stories is part of this tradition. And you know, I would have never become a writer if it hadn't been for some critical, particularly Chicana authors. Two of the most important Chicana authors for me are Sandra Cisneros and Gloria Anzaldúa. In addition to my creative writing, nonfiction writing, I also write poetry. And I would never even have thought that I could write poetry if I had never read Sandra Cisneros' work. When I read Sandra Cisneros, I see myself, the way that she blends in, the way that I blend in English and Spanish. You know, as somebody who grew up in the United States, but was raised by immigrant parents, I very much see myself as belonging to both identities. Speaking English, I'm fluent in English and Spanish. Speaking both is so speaking Spanglish is my most comfortable way of speaking. And so I model this in my writing. But you know, there was a time in my education when that wasn't allowed. And you know, you had to translate everything you wrote, if you even wrote anything in Spanish. I mean, where there was a time in our literary history where we couldn't speak Spanish, much less write in it, and have it published. And so the way that these women were writing in the 20th century was really important for people who came after, like me. And not just Chicano writers are really important to my literary history, but in particular the women, because even the Chicano movement, as it represented and really built an identity around those of us who were born in the United States, Mexican Americans, you know, those gender narratives were also so important for the experiences that we as women were living. And so these writers in particular gave voice. Gloria Anzaldúa writes about identity. Sandra Cisneros is, you know, she's free. She writes however she wants. You know, she's sexy and she curses and she's all of these things that you're taught as a Mexican woman that you're not allowed to be. And she does that intentionally. And that was just so empowering to me. You know, as a young girl, I was always so angry. Like, why does my brother get to do this, but I don't get to do this? Why do I have to be like this? And Sandra Cisneros was, you know, she was coming out raging, right? And then Gloria Anzaldúa is queer. And so she's raging even more. And so it's just like, wow, I didn't know I could do this. You know, well, there's consequences, but you can, you know, you can have that freedom in writing. And so I've created this identity for myself as a writer. And I'm very passionate about my writing. But when I started promoting my book, you know, I also was learning this last book. I was also learning how hard it is to get our writing out there as Latina authors, and you know how difficult it is to have our books always stocked in bookstores. All of the politics behind, you know, whose books gets promoted, whose don't, it's if it's Hispanic Heritage Month, then, perhaps you find more Latino authors on the shelf. If it's a really famous author, you'll see it at Barnes and Noble. Right? The ones we see all the time are Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Julia Alvarez, right? We see these all the time. And these are Latin American authors, and they're great and they're wonderful, but there's so many others. And the voices are so diverse, right? And so you have these Latin American traditions that are bound to the history and politics of those nations, whether you're talking about an Argentinian author or a Colombian author, a Mexican author. Their voices are bound to those national identities and experiences. Whereas Latino authors, those of us who are born here in the United States, our voices are bound to our experiences growing up in this country and being of both identities, rejected by both, not feeling like we belong in either or. And I was the kind of person who, anytime I would see a reading or any type of presentation by a Latino author, I was right there. I was, signed up. I was always searching the web for these readings. Anytime I went into a bookstore, that's what I was looking for. A library, I'm always looking for the Latino authors. And, really being a detective, having to go in and find them because they're not necessarily put on display. And, for many years I thought, gosh, I wish we could have a bookstore that would have all of these books on display, where I could just go in and grab them all. And, it was just recently that I decided that, well, if this isn't going to happen, then I'm going to do it myself. And so, just, I guess 4 months now, I launched Dreamers, which is a bookstore that focuses specifically on Latina and Latin American books and authors. And, I specifically say and authors because I do want to make sure that the books that are being included are by these authors. You could fill an entire bookstore of books about Latinos that are not written by the groups that they're writing about. And so it is important for me to provide a space for these folks, as I've wanted a space for my book, right? And so far, I'm in the 4 months that I've been doing this, and I started the bookstore as a pop-up shop, as a way of seeing if there's any interest, first of all, if people want this, and where there's more interest. So I do pop-ups throughout Houston. I go to different, primarily, I started off in cafes. I'm doing a couple of markets now, but now I'm also exploring other spaces. So I recently did a pop-up. Just this last weekend, I did a pop-up at the Contemporary Arts Museum of Houston. They have the Vincent Valdez exhibit. And, in the true sense of the word pop-up, my pop-ups have been very guerrilla style. And so I just kind of show up and I say, hey, I got these books. You want books? And, sometimes people say yes, sometimes they say no, but, the camp said yes. And I thought this would be such a great opportunity to offer some follow-up reading as you close the exhibit, an exhibit that's really, really heavy in many ways on the Mexican-American experience. And so, yeah, I was very excited to do that, and it was a smashing success. And so I'm hoping to continue that and to get into eventually a physical space. I'm not in a hurry. Slow and steady, I think, wins the race. And so I'm taking my time, listening to what people want. The most exciting part of this, though, however, has been seeing just the diversity of Houston communities that are supportive of this bookstore. I knew that people would want something like this, and it's wonderful to see it from people of all walks of life. I think that's been the most beautiful part. The bookstore aims to do exactly what I do in my writing, which is to break down these stereotypes that Latinos only are one thing, or look a certain way, or speak a certain way, or have one story, just this political trauma story, or are just migrants, or, all of these things are true, and those are part of our stories, but there's also so many other things. you know, Latinos write about math and science and the ocean, and write poetry, write about love, and write about belonging and all sorts of things. And I want to have a space where, you know, people can really awaken to the diversity of what is an incredibly diverse group of people. And we're talking about people who represent the diversity of the world when it comes to, you know, race and ethnicity, and speak a plethora of languages. And so for me, the bookstore then, even just existing in itself, I think could be a space of discovery and expansion when it comes to really understanding this kind of diverse group of communities. And so I see, you know, this as not really straying away from my writing, but really in line with myself as a leader in my community, a member of my community. I was born and raised in Houston. This is my city, you know, and I love the city, and you know, I know it, you know, and I think it's my responsibility to do something good for it. And I think this is just how I've been raised and how I've always felt. There's so many things going on right now that have a lot of us feeling really hopeless. And, you know, there's so many reasons not to do something like this right now, but I've never, I've never shied away from anything. I think my parents can speak to that, you know, and I decide I want to do something, I go for it regardless of, you know, who's in what White House or what's going on. And so, you know, this is my way of making the world a little bit better, you know, maybe for my children and for all of our children. And so this is how I see Dreamers, and kind of me giving back as a leader, but also kind of contributing to making this authorial community a better place for all of us. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I had so many questions. I'm Melody, as you were going through, but starting kind of at the end, where you said you have these pop-up stores. Well, first of all, how are you letting people know when and where you're popping up, and where are you popping up?
Yeah. So sometimes I can plan them ahead of time. And so when I do, I post them on Instagram. That's the primary social media site that I'm using. It also goes to Facebook, so they're connected. So I'll post them there. And when I have them ahead of time, I'll make a flyer and I'll do that. And but sometimes I just show up and then I'll post while I'm there. But I've been frequenting the similar places. And so I think at the moment I have found a lot of interest in the Second Ward in the East End of Houston. It's really ideal in many ways. There are several universities in that area, so there's a lot of young readers. It's a place that's really, you know, being built up by the community in really creative and interesting ways. So yeah, that's primarily how I advertise, and hoping to be a little bit more strategic about putting out those calendars and things like that as I continue to grow the store.
Okay. And I'm gonna butt in and ask one more question because I've unmuted myself. So it sounds like a fabulous book. I've been getting on Amazon here and finding it. But if I can find you, I can buy it from you in a pop-up. But so how did you go about getting this book published? Did you approach somebody before you started writing it? Did you kind of do the traditional thing where you had some outlines? Because it sounded like you spent a long time working on this book.
Yes, I had already published a book. So the book is published by the University of Texas Press, and I had already published a book with them. And so it was pretty easy. I was trying to shop around other presses, and I had thought about talking to a non-academic press because I really wanted it to be a book that was more that wasn't just for academia. And a lot of times university presses that's just the way it ends up happening. So I wanted it to be a more popular book for a wider community. But I didn't really understand that publication process because I'd always gone through the academic process. And so I just, I said, okay, I'm going to talk to UT Press. I talked to them and they were able to work with me. The book was also a creative endeavor. And so I think that it was really fortunate that I had already published with UT Press and they kind of trusted me as a writer. And so I was able to do I was able to be more experimental with the work because I had an editor that kind of trusted that it was gonna work out. It was gonna be good.
Okay. I am going to remove the spotlight on you just so you can see, or everyone can see you. Okay.
Did I answer your full question?
Yes, you did. And if somebody doesn't ask another question, I'll have to jump in. Y'all, everyone's muted. I kind of went along and muted people if you weren't already muted.
Are all, you've talked about the books being published in Spanish and English, or are they mostly in Spanish, or
The Dreamers books?
yes?
Yes, so the Dreamers books are mostly in English,
Oh,
actually.
mostly in English. Okay.
Yes, they're primarily, this has actually been a really, really interesting thing, like learning moment for me. I when I had the first pop-up, I had a couple of people that showed up and were a little bit trepidatious and were like, I didn't know if there was going to be anything for me. I figured they were all going to be in Spanish. And we're surprised that the majority of the books were in English. And so I think this is, again, just the book, just the store existing is already creating, right, a different form of understanding. The reason that a lot of the books are in English is because there are, these are Latino authors who were born and raised here and are writing about their experiences here. So they're writing in English. So I'm actually, it's actually it's on my to-do list to get more Spanish books, to bring in more Spanish books, because there are folks that want Spanish books. So I think that that's something that once I have the physical store, I'll be able to do that a little bit better. And I'll have a section of Spanish and Portuguese books. I also speak Portuguese and I've done research in Brazil. And so I have a nice collection of Brazilian scholarship, and eventually I want to have some books in Portuguese as well.
Yeah. Sounds wonderful.
Thank you.
Hi, Elizabeth. I wanted to ask a question about your process and your methods. It sounds kind of like you brought an academic background, maybe almost like an ethnography to how you approach this. And I think that there's probably a lot of pushback about in interacting, like you said, as a part of the form, interacting with your subjects. And so I'm interested in how you developed kind of the confidence to do that and what new kind of nuances it brought when you were talking to your subjects.
Yes. So actually, the book has been really well received in academia and particularly in anthropology. The last award that the book won was for the Society of American Anthropology, which is a pretty big award for us. And I was really surprised by that because when I wrote the book, I meant it to be very anti-anthropology. It was I was sticking it to my field, and yet they loved it. And I think this is very much, how we are. And so, and I think that again comes from a tradition of scholars such as me, scholars of color, who have started to really push that boundary and to say, it's really impossible for us to separate our subject from our own lives, to make ourselves objective observers of something that is so personal to us. And then at the same time that we're talking about that, we're also saying, but also nobody is an objective observer to anything. We all come in with perspective, with bias, and that bias seeps into everything we write and everything that we do. So there's other types of things that I do in the book, that other layers to the book that also reinscribe that bias, that critique of the objective observer, and kind of having those biases and what it means to be in dialogue, right? And shared dialogue of hearing a story. How much can we really retain? And then when we're writing it, you know, we don't write it in the exact way that we heard it. And so in the book, I have sketches throughout the book that are blind contour drawings. And so I don't know if anyone's familiar with blind contour drawing, but blind contour drawing is it's a form of study, actually. And so the idea is that you're drawing a subject without ever looking down at the paper. And so you're so focused on the subject. It's really fascinating because you're so focused on the subject that you think that your drawing is going to come out exactly as you see that person. But when you look down at the paper, it's an abstraction, to put it nicely, right? With an eyeball here and maybe the nose over here. And so I include these blind contours as a way of illustrating the same thing that happens in dialogue. When we're listening to another person's story and then, you know, and then writing that story or interpreting that story, which is to say, you know, it's an abstraction. So in that sense, I think that the book has been really well received for the things that it does. And I'm excited. I mean, I'm glad for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was something that the surrealists also did, as a way of, I'm sure a lot of you know that already, but as a way of removing barriers, your internal barriers. And yeah, and I think it's a really valuable exercise. And even doing that writing that way, you know? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, that's my dog barking away. I'm gonna mute myself.
Do you need to introduce your little sidekick there?
This is my daughter, Naya.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah. She had very strict instructions to stay in the room. She's a free spirit too.
I think it's very sweet and appropriate that she's there
I
with
know.
you tonight.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned two writers. One was Sandra Cisneros. What was the other writer that you mentioned?
It's Gloria Anzaldúa.
Okay.
You can put it in the chat if you want.
Okay.
That would be great.
I also wanted to mention that I looked at your website for the books pop-up book, and what I noticed was that they're poetry and either children's or young adults. So yeah, that's interesting. I presume you're going to expand a little bit beyond that.
Yes, yes. I have books for everyone. So I have children's books. I'm really I'm really into children's literacy for obvious reasons. You know, I've read to my children. I think that that's such an important way of initiating any kind of education and change and sharing these stories. And so so yes, I have a good selection of books for all ages. And I have different genres. And so I'm, you know, as somebody who also writes poetry, I love poetry. And so it's something that, you know, I love having and introducing. And so I think the only genre I don't have is romance. But other than that, I pretty much have everything. I'm also really interested in having academic books. Particularly because I think that these are books, as I said before, they don't always get to the public. They don't always get circulated. They're not always as accessible. Now that I'm on this end of the book selling table, I understand a little bit of the reason. They're a little bit more expensive to acquire. They're not as easy to acquire as your you know, your blockbuster or your bestseller. You can usually find from various distributors. Academic books are not always that way. They don't always offer a discount. But it is, you know, but I also think that being an academic and being an academic writer, I think I have a little bit of that, of a privilege where I can really, I know some of the books that are going to be not only interesting for people and people are going to want to read them, but they're going to be accessible, written in a way that isn't full of jargon and isn't completely dry, you know, because that's how I've written. And so I've made it my job to introduce myself to other academics that write that way. And so I bring these books, I have a nice selection of these types of books, and they do really well. I think a lot of folks are surprised at how well I'm able to sell some of these academic, some philosophy focused type books. And I think it's because I sell them, you know, I talk to people about them. I share the topics with them. I'm excited. I know the topics, and I think that helps me be able to sell books that might not be as traditional and that you might see in traditional bookstores.
Can you say a little bit more? You talked a lot about the experience of writing about your subject and also not excluding your own story. Can you say a little bit more about that from a writer's perspective of how to do both?
So one of my role models in what she calls vulnerable writing is Ruth Behar. And so Ruth Behar has a book called The Vulnerable Observer, and where she talks about, because she does this in her work, she has a really big book. I think it's just, I can't remember the exact title, but I think it might be called Esperanza, where she does, you know, so basically what I'm trying to do is something very similar to what Behar is doing, which is a single subject narrative, where you're just following one person and writing that person's story. Now, Behar writes this book in the early or late 20th centuries, in 1990, maybe. It's a different type of anthropology. So the way that she writes it is very much in the documentary style of anthropology, which is very much just almost repeating word for word what she's heard. And then she inserts her own story. Ruth Behar is a Cuban Jewish woman, immigrant woman. And so it's a really, and the woman that she writes about is a Mexican street seller in Mexico. She's talking to in Mexico. And so she adds, the book is so big because what she does is the first half of the book, which is like a book in itself, is all about Esperanza. And then the second half of the book is all about her and kind of what I'm doing, which is how she's feeling as she's interviewing Esperanza and all of the things that are going through her mind and how she's comparing and not comparing. And because she wrote it at a different historical moment, she did get a lot of pushback. She got a lot of pushback for that book. I mean, it was not so well received, because people felt that she was comparing herself to somebody who was very, very different from her. And so it wasn't, so when I talk about how my book was received, I think it's really important to speak to the historical moment. So we're in a, you know, my book is coming out in a different historical moment where more people are writing these kinds of narratives. And there's a different, we've learned lessons. And so we're applying those lessons. But one of the people that I was able to study those lessons from was from Ruth Behar, and see what she did, what she got in trouble for, and, you know, try not to make the same mistakes. But always kind of teetering on, you know, the complexity of writing vulnerably. And so one second. Sorry. In the Vulnerable Observer, that first chapter that she has talks about some of the things that I've been talking about. I think that, you know, I think that there is a certain kind of art to writing and including your own experience in an ethnography, in a work like this. But I do think that it also, a lot of it is just practice. So there were, you know, I had written for many years in this way, in ways that felt more clunky, and where I was kind of working out this practice for myself. How much of yourself do you reveal? How little? Are you comparing yourself in places? I was always really careful that to not decenter Claudia. I didn't want to make it about me. And so there isn't really a lot about me personally in the book. I kind of defined the boundaries of my writing. And so the boundaries were going to be about really looking what I said in the beginning, which is how is it that my mother's narratives connected to Claudia's narratives? And so I don't do what Behar did, which is I don't separate the stories. I weave them together like a tapestry, as I said, but I'm always communicating that to the reader. This is what I'm doing. I communicate to the reader that these stories are not the same, so that it doesn't appear that I'm making myself seem like these experiences are the same. And then I explain what is the connection that I want you to see, you know, and the connection that I want you to know is that, you know, these are, there are experiences that are tied to the border and to kind of being from these two groups. And so, and that all of that is intentional, in really making sure that I'm not kind of co-opting the story, because I did want the story to be primarily about Claudia. The other thing that I did was I was very clear with Claudia from the beginning what the book was going to look like, so that she knew that this was what to expect. And I told her at that time, I didn't know that I was going to be including my mother's stories, but I did tell her that I was potentially going to be including other people's stories, that it was going to look like a weaving of stories. I told her that her story might be abstracted, that there might be things that I changed. And I did that primarily to protect her identity. So I changed a lot of details, and excluded some things that she told me to make sure that I also kept her safe. And so there was a lot of different things that I did that I also talked to her about. So that was, I think that's also unique. I don't know that people usually talk to their subjects. Traditionally, anthropologists go somewhere far, study people, and then go back to another country and write about them. And so it was a little bit different because Claudia is part of my community and is nearby. And so I'm able to, you know, we had our children at the same school, we were in similar communities. And so I was able to talk more with her about the writing process. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Unmute. We've had some wonderful monthly meetings and had different memoirists, Donna Johnson who wrote a terrific memoir. And I wanted to ask you, do you see your work on a spectrum of what we now think of memoir or memoir writing or nonfiction writing? Where do you put yourself on that spectrum?
I do see it a little bit. And sometimes I do, when I explain it to people, I do describe it a little bit as a type of memoir. Because I do get so personal about how I grew up and you know, these narratives that even though they're my mother's narratives, but to me, these are my maternal narratives are the most important to my core identity. And I'm talking about, you know, how Mexican motherhood is created and what Mexican motherhood looks like. And so as I'm talking about Claudia and I'm thinking about my mothers, I'm also thinking about how I am becoming as a Mexican mother, the things that I, you know, have inherited in terms of cultural ideology, but also in terms of the body and, you know, the traumas that I carry and the things that have happened to me in, you know, as a woman with a uterus and what that looks like. The book speaks to illness, and uterine diseases and things like that come up, because these are things that Claudia's dealing with and things that my mother's also dealt with. I call my grandmother my mother, and so that's why I say my mother's. I was primarily raised by my grandmother, and so I think my mother and I were both raised by my grandmother, so I pretty much call her my mother as well. And so I do see it a little bit, and I mean, not completely. In anthropology, we have something called autoethnography, and so it's also something that kind of started, maybe mid 21st century. That's also kind of helped this type of writing be recognizable. And so again, more anthropologists are doing this kind of work where they're going and researching, very intentionally, the places that they came from, or even doing archival work with their families, and writing about those histories, and then connecting it to geography, to politics, to water systems, to all kinds of things, but starting with their core group of family and community.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I hate to be asking all the questions, but
Mm-hmm.
do you think about your audience as well when you're writing, and how does that fit into your process overall?
Yes, I think a lot about my audience. And, in my mind, my audience loves all of the same things that I love. And my audience speaks Spanglish and likes to read in these kind of layered, complex, language stories. And I've really, this is one of the things that it's taken me time to develop the confidence to write in that voice. I had my first book I wrote was on Brazil. I did research in Brazil. And when one of the people who reviewed it, one of the things that they wrote, the first thing that they wrote on one of the reviews was, it's okay to say this. It's okay to have an opinion. You don't have to apologize for everything, and it was because every single thing that I wrote, that I said, that was my own idea, I would back it up with like 10,000 other people to make sure that it was okay to say that. And so it took me a lot of work to develop the confidence to say, okay, this is my voice. And like Sandra Cisneros, I know that there's going to be people out there who are going to like that voice and are going to love that voice. And so one of the things that I believe in now very strongly, and I see this also with the bookstore, is in having an identity, and understanding your audience, and then basically being ride or die for that audience. And I think that having that kind of integrity for the audience that you choose, what that does is it makes you authentic, and it makes people trust you because you have an identity, you have a point of view. And even though the book is seemingly focused on one group of people, what ends up happening is that all of these other people end up loving it too, that you never imagined would love it, because you've presented a strong point of view in a voice that you believe in, and you're showing that you believe in, you have confidence in. And so kind of, as opposed to trying to be for everybody, and do everything for everybody. And it's not possible, first of all, to make everybody happy, but even trying to appear as though you want to make everybody happy, or you want to just kind of stay in the happy medium. And I'm a Libra, so we like balance, we like to be we like to be in the middle. Yeah. So it is hard for me to say, wait, I'm going to take a stance, and people really respect that. And so I think I do think about my reader a lot, and I think about my audience a lot when it comes to the books that I choose for the store as well. Thank you for that question.
keep asking questions, sorry. But do you think you would have come around to this perspective of without the academic background? Do you think had you chosen to write without this anthropological information and perspective, do you think you would have come around to the same place that you are in now?
I don't know, because I identify very strongly with that. But in a way I do, because so much of my objective as an academic and as a writer has been influenced by my community, which is to me is my family. And so when I write, even before I understood what I was doing, I always knew that I wanted to write in a way that my parents could read it. My grandmother could read it. Even if it was, I mean, if they were to read, in fact, my grandmother couldn't read in English, but if she could read in English, that it was something that was accessible to her. I never wanted to be inaccessible to them. And I was raised that way because when I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to speak English in the house because my grandmother didn't speak English, and so that was disrespectful. And so we could never not be accessible to her, and if we did speak English and we were discovered, we would get in so much trouble. And that's why I speak Spanish fluently. It's kind of traumatic, actually. And so, as soon as I was in academia, in anthropology, when you go to graduate school for it, it's very I don't know. It's very rooted in rhetoric and theory, and it isn't as community based as you would think, or as it's supposed to be, as human based. It is very heady, and so this was a shock to me when I got to my graduate program. And I'm surrounded by all these other students from the rhetoric program, and I'm just like, oh my God. And I'm getting in trouble because I'm trying to apply these theories to how our everyday lives, and I'm getting smacked on the hand and saying that's not what you're supposed to do with theory. You're not supposed to apply it to real life. And I'm like, well, then why are we here? So it was always that was always my thinking, ever since I was in graduate school. And I was always connected to action and to application. It was always really important for me to be able to apply the things that I was doing, and to be centered in community. And honestly, so it doesn't surprise me that I am where I am now. I'm running a bookstore and I'm doing these kinds of things, because it's just really hard for me to just kind of sit in ivory towers and in spaces of thinking. I think they're important. I think spaces of knowledge production are incredibly important, but I also need to add the kind of the action aspect to it. And that comes from how I grew up. I grew up in a working class family where nobody went to college. Everybody was working with their hands. And so I always felt like I needed, and I was always told that I wasn't doing real work, that thinking wasn't real work. And so I always had to find ways to prove myself that I was actually working, to people who, were accustomed to working with their bodies, with their physical bodies. And so I may have come around to it, but having that community has definitely built me as a writer. I think mostly I've had to do a lot of work in unlearning the things that I learned as an academic writer, because it is it's a really narrow and very specific way of being trained to write that I've had to kind of free myself from. So to be the creative writer that I really want to be and that I've wanted.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, I didn't mean to cut you off if you had something else to say.
No, I was going to say there's no better way of doing that than to be in community with other writers and just, reading a lot of work.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your gifts and your life with us and your family with us tonight. I think I speak for all of us when to say that we've been very moved by hearing your story. And you know, I'm the kind of person that when I hear you say something about the hopelessness of your community, I want to do something. I want to know, what can I do? And hopefully by reading your books, maybe that'll give me a small clue as to maybe something that I could do and that we all could do. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to open it up now to anyone who has some announcements about, oh, let's give her a hand. Let's do that.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure to be here with you. I really do appreciate it. And I hope to see you all in all of these wonderful events and in other spaces very soon. I'm gonna have to get out because my daughter is needing something, and so I may not be able to stay, but please know that I appreciate this space very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So anyone have some announcements tonight they want to share with us?
Kelly.
I have one. So the journal that Hot Poet puts out is going to be released on Thursday, and the several of WIVLA members are in it, and Celeste won the art section of the contest. So, hey, Celeste, Margot's in it. Looking around to see who else. But anyway, we're having a launch party at Kojak's on Friday, the 21st, and the journal will be available on Thursday, and you can find it at hotpoet.org. Just scroll down to Equinox, and we're really excited about it. It turned out quite beautiful, and I'm happy that people in WIVLA have supported the effort, and some of you've submitted work. And anyway, everyone's invited to the event. It's at 6:30. But get there at 6 if you can. At Kojak's in the Heights, which is on 18th Street. And if you need more information, I put together a Facebook event, and Margot is a co-host. So between the two of us, we'll get an invitation to you if you just message one of us and tell us, hey, I want to be there, give me the info. And then on Sunday, we have a virtual event, a virtual reading at 2:00. And so again, I can give you more about that if you're interested in attending either or both. Thanks, that's it.
Is it also on the WIVLA calendar? I don't know.
Oh, thank you, Margot, for putting it there.
Okay, well, I have something. Couple things. I was accepted into the abstraction show as a juried exhibition up at the Artist Gallery in the Woodlands, and I was excited about that. And then I was really excited that I got third place. And then the owner of the gallery posted some pictures of it on Instagram today, and I looked, and there was a red dot next to it. And so I was really excited about that. So,
Wow.
but yeah, so it's always red dots are happy, right?
I have, yeah.
Couldn't be
Yeah.
any better if they put a smiley face on it.
That's fabulous.
So also, I have a solo show at the Jung Center that starts April 5th. The reception is April 5th from 5 to 7 p.m. The parking around there is not always great. I frequently park across the street at the Glassell School of Art parking lot and carefully walk across the street, even though there's a light. I've come close a couple times to meeting the grill of a car. Also on the Saturday, the 26th, and this is also a WIVLA outing, there's Artist Talk at the Jung Center from 2 to 3:30. So both of these things are on the WIVLA calendar. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll probably see it to death also. But I look forward to seeing you guys, seeing you there.
And I have something on March the 26th at the Pearland Knapp Melvin Center. And it's a Wednesday, and it's from 11:45 to about an hour. I won't talk that long, but I'll be talking about the adventures of Big Ben, and it's always entitled a walk around the block. And I'm talking about the emotional blocks that we go through, and I just use hiking as a way to bring out some of um, the its or the things that we're not aware of. So that talk will be Wednesday, March the 26th, from 11:45 till about maybe 45 minutes, unless the audience, they're so enthralled in the PowerPoint and what I'm having to say. And that is in Pearland, Texas, which is way on the side of town, but it is in Pearland, Texas, and it starts at 11:45. And I don't know if it's on the Wibble calendar or not, but I know I said it last month, so I may have submitted it. Maybe I think it's there, March 26th.
Okay, I have some things. Okay, I put these in the chat. So I put the information about the reading at Kojak's for Hot Poets for Friday. And then I put information about the Real Poetry Film and Video Festival. So my videos will screen on Tuesday and Friday before I have my surgery. Yay!
Yay.
Oh no.
And then no, I want to get out of this sling. I've been here since December. I'm getting tired of it. Anyway, so also we'll have some videos to play at the Bring Your Own Beamer at the Menil in the yard on, let's see, what date is that? That is Saturday the 25th, April 25th. And then I put in a link to the WIVLA calendar because all these things are on the calendar. All right, that's it.
Well, Shirley Beyer and Brenda Bowman, another WIVLA member, and I are in the midst of an exhibit at the Fort Bend Museum. It's on display now, and it'll be on display through May 19th, right, Shirley? April 19th.
No,
No,
May the 17th.
May 17th. Okay. I got too many dates in my head.
The journeys of three.
Journeys of three. Yes, we've all been so many places in the world, and all of our art is about the different places that we've been, either externally or internally. Some of our work is about internal journeys that we've taken. So we'd love to have you, if you have the time, to take the trek out to Richmond, Texas. Anyone else?
I'm just wondering how things going with the portrait reading that's set for April the 12th. What's the plan on that? I know I'm not the lead on it, but I got it organized. I'm just trying to make sure that we do have poets show up and read, or folks are going to do the short stories.
Is just about full, I think. Let me take another look. When I signed up, there were not many left.
Yeah, the last I looked at, it looked like it was full, but I thought maybe someone signed up twice, so I need to figure out. But yeah, it's pretty full. One way to, I guess I could fix that, Rebecca, is just add a couple more slots. But unless the people who signed up twice are Geminis and then they read twice, I don't know.
Was the person who signed up twice did that on purpose in order to read more, but I could.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't get a chance to sign up. If I could, if it's not possible, then that's not possible.
Well, I think we can add a couple more.
Yeah.
Oh, if I could, if it's
yeah.
And I'll do it tonight, so I won't not do it tonight.
Okay, well then it means I have tonight. So, okay.
If any of you lovely ladies will be in Melbourne, Florida next Wednesday, I have a book event there at a country club. Or if you have friends there,
Oh, God.
let me know and I'll invite them in.
A country
Just saying.
Sounds fancy.
Yeah.
That is. Yes.
Yeah, it is. It's nice to have friends.
In high places.
Oh,
Well, who love you enough to do these things with you and
That's
for you.
yes, it's true.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, it's been a great meeting, hasn't it?
Yes.
Really, really was inspired by Elizabeth's presentation. I hope we all get her book and read it.
I already bought it.
Excellent.
You already bought it.
I did.
Yes, I've been on her website and yeah.
Did you buy it through Dreamers?
I bought it through the press, the Texas press that she was published by. And I thought I got a hard copy, but I actually ended up pushing the button for the online. So anyway, I figured out how to put it on my phone.
You were shopping during the meeting.
I was. No, I really enjoyed that, and I think it's going to be fabulous to read. And I want to go to the bookstore whenever it opens, I guess.
Yes, for sure.
Yes, it's just pop-ups right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we need to follow her on Instagram so we can see where she's going to pop up next.
Yeah, we could
And we can
her
pop up
Good
too.
point.
We could pop her up over in
pop
Sawyer
in.
Yards.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, if there's nothing else, I think we're gonna adjourn for the evening.
Let me just say one thing. I have
Sure.
a podcast coming out tomorrow, and it is with this guy. He's a 78, I think, year old white guy, and he talks about race and racism, and it is the most fascinating conversation I have ever had on the topic. I will post it on the website. And I tell you what, I was educated by this guy, and like I said, I've never met a person who said I'm a racist or I was a racist. And it was just a beautiful conversation. He's a
Wow.
Presbyterian pastor, and he talks about his transformation from that person to, and he talks about how he didn't learn he said, I wasn't born saying I'm going to be a racist. This is just what was around me. And of course, think about his age. And of course, it's understandable. And he was born and raised in Arkansas. So I will post that on the website.
Can you say his name, Mildred?
Yes, his name is Reverend Nibs, Nibs, Stroop, Stroupe.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And I will, like I said, I'll post it on the website tomorrow.
Okay.
And that'll be out. You said it'll be out tomorrow?
Yes.
Oh,
Okay.
the Wednesdays. Oh, that's good.
Are you going to post it on the Facebook group page
Yes.
also? Okay, perfect.
Oh, I meant the Facebook group. Yes, that's what
Okay.
Okay.
No, not the
website.
website,
Okay.
the Facebook group. Yes.
Perfect.
I don't do much Instagram, so Facebook is how you're gonna get Instagram. I don't even, but Facebook, I'll definitely get.
Okay.
All right.
Alrighty. Thanks,
All right,
guys.
I'm gonna listen to that for sure.
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah.
And I love your comments.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, well,
Excellent.
I guess that's it for tonight.
That's all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Good
All
night.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.